not do that. But I think we're going to have many, many extended debates in the next few weeks. There are so many controversial issues. People playing against the clock will try to obstruct.
Are you confident that this aid will pass both houses?
Yes, I am. I'm not certain what hour and what day, but eventually it's going to occur.
What do you see as a scenario taking place in Nicaragua over the next 2.5 years, the balance of Ronald Reagan's second term?
I think if we are successful in making sure that the Contras are Democrats in the sense that they're heading toward a democratic constitution, that they are well trained, the money gets to them, that they will put sufficient pressure on the Sandinistas to get to a point of negotiations. And then we will have a constituent assembly or a constitutional assembly, and in due course elections, and that country will rejoin the rest of Central America with democratically elected governments.
Don't you have any doubt about that? This will be the first time that communists have surrendered control, even in the face of very difficult odds.
Well, it may be a first time, but there are always first times. I think it's a very important part of American foreign policy that we have the ability to set up circumstances in which a government of the left changes in the same way as the government of the right might change. In other words, it seems to me the Reagan doctrine extended means that governments of the right and the left literally are amenable to change when the circumstances are good.
You know that this government of Ronald Reagan played a role, facilitated the deposition of Francois Duvalier and of Mr. Marcos.
Yes.
And you probably played some kind of a role in that.
I was involved.
You were involved. Do you see that kind of thing taking place then in Nicaragua?
Yes, I do. I think people who called for the Philippine solution in Nicaragua were correct in a way that they had not anticipated. The Philippine solution is to move circumstances in Nicaragua to the point where there is a call for an election and somebody gets elected by the will of the people with parties around there, a free press, free religion, a number of circumstances of that kind.
In El Salvador, it is said that Napoleon Duarte is in very grave trouble politically, the economy being exceedingly bad, totally aside from the civil war going on in that country. What do you know about that situation, Senator?
Well, he does have great political troubles, but he's had them before. He's a strong man. I don't discount the dilemma, but at the same time, he's still in control.
You think he's going to stay in office?
Yes, I do.
Let me talk to you about Panama in the case of General Noriega, who is ruling that country, and the charges against him of gross corruption, $100 million in a Swiss banking account. Can you tell me what your information is on that subject?
Well, I think the charges are very serious. I think the dilemma is one in which our country wants to see a democracy move on in Panama. We'd like to see the cycle end and an election occur, but I take very seriously the charges being made about Noriega.
You think the charges are true?
Well, I think there is considerable validity in them.
Do you know that the State Department is saying that none of these charges can actually be traced back to Noriega?
Well, I simply accept, that is one opinion about it all, but my guess is that there are problems here, and they're ones that our government will have to face.
A quick question on Mexico before we exit from this segment. This government in the United States, for the first time, has decided to go public with its grave and serious and critical complaints against the government of Mexico. This occurred during the Helms hearings on Mexico, where we have this government, representatives of the government, notably the Commissioner of Customs, has said that the government of Mexico is corrupt or is filled with corruption as far as law enforcement is concerned. Do you approve of the general tactic or strategy or deportment of the U.S. government in going public with a complaint about a neighbor with whom we have a 2,000-mile border?
Well, I think this is a free country. When people are asked for testimony, as Mr. Van Raab was, and they give it, and Elliot Abrams gave testimony, they ought to tell the truth. They did so. I think the charge is being made, and you've inferred this a little bit, that even if there are some truths here, they ought to be handled behind closed doors. But I suspect that we're beyond that point in the relationship. I think we're probably handling a lot of things in public. This means that we better be sympathetic, however, on some other occasions with the fact that Mexico is our friend, that it's a very important government, This is not a time for general stone throwing.
Would you like to see the United States involve itself in a multilateral bailout of Mexico as occurred in 1982 when $9 billion was put together to so relieve their distress then, notwithstanding the fact that they failed to diversify their portfolio and they depended 75% upon oil revenues, failing to realize that oil revenues are notoriously unstable? Isn't it a lot like giving $50 to a drunk? You don't know whether A, you're wasting your money, and B, you're doing him any good?
No, it's not like that. The United States is involved. Our Secretary of the Treasury has evolved a plan in which Mexico will have to make a number of reforms, but likewise, some American banks, some European banks, some governments, including our own, will be involved in a Mexican solution.
In Switzerland this past week, Senator Bill Bradley suggested that we relieve the countries who owe a substantial amount of money to banks of 3% of the principal and interest on those debts for their willingness to execute economic reforms, like use the magic of the marketplace, I guess. And that, what do you think of that 3% idea? It took everybody by surprise.
Well, it does people by surprise because the real problem now is to get banks, private banks, to loan any money to Mexico. The dilemma of the Bradley suggestion and others is that if you wipe off some of the debt and arrange the past, that may be well enough, but trying to get money in the future is something else.
Let me talk to you a little bit about South Africa. As you know, the violence continues there. The United States government has announced that it is going to make a reasonably comprehensive reassessment of U.S. policy towards South Africa. That policy has been described as constructive engagement. Do you think it's a good idea to put constructive engagement under the lens and take another look at it?
Well, I do think there's a basic decision to be made here, and that is whether the United States will continue to be involved in affairs of South Africa or whether, in fact, we're going to get out. Now, the House of Representatives has passed legislation which suggests we get out. I guess the State Department and the President still want to stay in. Now, if we stay in, under what conditions? And we really will have to examine that as a country because we're under great pressures. The businesses we have over there are leaving in good numbers. Most American citizens are wholly dissatisfied with the way that whites in South Africa conduct themselves. So the net political and economic situation is leading toward our getting out, whether we have decided to do that formally or not.
The measures that were passed in the House of Representatives, those sanctions were draconian by anyone's estimate. They want not only no further new investment, but they want existing United States investments amounting to the billions of dollars to be withdrawn. Are you going to pass that kind of legislation in the Senate?
Well, I'm not personally going to support that, but I would just say the House of Representatives did so unanimously. Now, people came behind the barn and said, well, now, don't take us seriously. Over there in the Senate, re-examine this and reshape it and do something or other with it. But the fact is that the administration must come forward now with a pretty good alternative. The Senate may or may not pass something like that, but my colleague Nancy Kassebaum has suggested very, very strong sanctions. And that's the
What role are you going to play as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the formulation of sanctions against South Africa?
Well, I don't know whether I'll play any role, but for the moment, I'm trying to stay in tune with our Secretary of State and our President and try to figure out what they want to do.
The Secretary of State takes the position that economic sanctions are counterproductive, notwithstanding the fact that he has imposed them against Nicaragua, correct?
Well, that's correct on both counts. He may be right that they are generally non-productive. As an economist, the Secretary has long memory of that, and he's probably right. In the current context, however, people are saying even if it didn't make any difference, there ought to be a sense of moral outrage, there ought to be a statement made. That essentially is what we did last year.
Do you have some idea in your head of the formulation of some punitive measure that can be taken against South Africa that would satisfy Reagan, satisfy the political requirement, and maybe effect some good?
Well, I don't as yet, but I hope to. I hope that moment will come because I think that we really need to do all of those things. In other words, we need to have the President and the Congress moving together. We need to make our voices clear in South Africa and the world, and we do need to make a moral statement.
Senator, you heard a delegation from the United States that observed the Philippine elections, and in the process of that, you saw Mrs. Aquino, President Aquino, up close. How do you think she's doing?
She's doing very well. She's made an extraordinary number of important political judgments with a great deal of skill. Her lifestyle, her religious faith, her general popularity have stood her in good stead.
Do you think that she's handled the communist situation well?
That remains to be seen. She's taken a gamble. The ceasefire idea, the idea of negotiations, may be a way of bringing some people out of the hills, may reduce her problem, will not end it. And so we're still, I think, in the early chapters of that book.
There are those who say that unless she gets the Constitution formulated and ratified by the end of the year, she will lose the momentum she now has going for her, and the situation will go into decay. Do you think that she'll get her Constitution ratified by the end of the year?
I think so, and I think those are very important objectives for her. She wants to have a constitutional democracy. Obviously, you have to have the Constitution. People are hard at work, and they have a fairly tight time frame, as I understand it.
General Enrile, who is now very close to her on the military side of her government, is not reputed to be Simon Pure, nor an example to all of us for moral rectitude. Does it give you any concern that he now ambitions the presidency of the